All right, ladies. Thank you so much for attending another great Money Monday with us. And your speaker of the day is yours truly, myself, Rosalyn Brown. I have spent, I'm actually got surprised when I thought of it. As of next year, it'll be 20 years in the financial services industry. And so I started my career in wealth management, working with high net worth clients, customizing financial planning and financial services for them. I had the great honor of starting a division with one of the financial institutions that I was with, where we expanded and we did a number of additional efforts in terms of emergent affluence. So these are our high earners who aren't quite there in terms of assets, but also our high net worth employees. So we would do some virtual things for those employees so we could keep them engaged, but also make sure that they didn't have to necessarily work with people who they saw every single day, day in and day out. So that was a really big deal as well. And then after that, I actually transitioned to what we consider to be institutional services. And in institutional services, it's where we work primarily with companies. And the biggest thing that we do is corporate retirement plans. So those are your 401ks, your 403bs, your profit sharing plans, your defined benefit plans, and so forth. And so really that's what I want to share with you today. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about where you are today as a business owner, one of the things that you have to be aware of are the competing factors that prevent you from being successful. But also when we talk about things like when it's time to sell your business, so we put so much energy and so much drive and so much of your time into creating a business, into growing a business. And then when you need liquidity from your business, sometimes that's not as easy. And so there are a few ways to transition that business, whether it be a family member, whether it be someone else, or you just happen to shut the doors down. But on the day that you want to retire, my key is always make sure you're in a situation from a liquidity standpoint that you can. And so that's where we come into the topic of today. It is learning how to exit your business as you grow. And so just being aware of that as you're continuing to grow, the needs and the issues that are most important for your business are going to continue to evolve. And so as you have questions, make sure you drop those in the chat. Of course, today we'll be monitoring and we have Jessica helping a little bit as well.
Hi, everyone.
You drop those questions and we'll make sure that we go through those as well. I have a little bit of a presentation, so we'll jump right on into that. Let me know when you can see my screen. Jessica, can you see it?
I can see it.
All right. So like I said, we're going to talk about planning your exit as you grow. And most people don't think about it. Their business is their baby. And so you create, you nurse, you grow this baby. And sometimes it might be simply that you're worn out. We have a number of business owners right now that are like, I don't want to continue to go through this pandemic. I want to walk away. And the last thing you want is to be in a situation where your only liquidity sits within your business. And so it's not a liquid asset. You may have to negotiate terms. When we talk about selling businesses, oftentimes those terms don't require you to get a check on day one. And so unfortunately, business owners find out the hard way is if they need more liquidity up front, the actual value of their business decreases. So that's a huge kind of thing for them to wake up and realize is I need money today. And maybe whoever is purchasing their business is saying, well, great, I'll give you money over the next 5 years, 10 years. Maybe you have to work for me for the next 3 years as a part of that transition. And unfortunately, that prevents that person from actually kind of riding off into the wind. So your vision of what selling your business might look like may be very different from what actually selling your business looks like. And so when we talk about the multitude of goals in terms of why people create a plan, why people put something in place for their employees, it's usually for one of three reasons. They're looking to recruit employees. So I am personally in Washington, D.C. And so there are a number of businesses that ramp up pretty fast. Maybe they're a government contractor and they win a new contract. Maybe you acquire another business, or maybe there's something great that is blown up and all of a sudden you have a lot more attention to your business and things are growing pretty rapidly and you have to bring on a lot more staff. So that's going to be the recruitment piece because you're competing with all these other employers out there and you're trying to get people to leave where they are in order to come work for you. It might be to retain employees. So for companies that have a significant amount of turnover, we look at a number of different things, and the retirement plan is not going to solve all those things, but there's a number of different reasons why people leave an organization. And one can definitely be benefits, especially as an employee gets a little bit older, maybe they have children, maybe they start planning a lot more for their future. They'll say, goodness, this company doesn't even have a retirement plan. So oftentimes people will say, goodness, I have to keep this in order to retain my staff. And then the last reason is to retire. And most people are like, goodness, I thought a retirement plan is for retirement. But no, there's a multitude of reasons. And so depending on where you are as a business owner, it takes the actual plan design conversation and your choices in different directions. So if you're really looking for the liquidity for you personally to retire, there are a number of different things that we can do, but that might not be the same thing that's going to help you retain or recruit employees as well. So there's a lot of good mix, but you really need to know your why, especially if you're just getting established or if you're looking to revise what you have to accomplish one of these goals. And so when we talk a little bit about recruitment, if we're in a competitive environment, so right now a lot of people are out of work, yes, but things change and things are often cyclical. So if we're recruiting, and we know a lot of people are changing businesses, they're moving, they're finding a new place, they're maybe doing a pivot. So you want to look at things and know what is the cost to bring on this employee. So as a business owner, there are always costs to bring on employees. There are the recruiting costs. So maybe if you're paying for an actual recruiter, maybe if you're paying for like an Indeed or what have you to throw ads out there, your background checks, the time out of your business actually spent interviewing. So you understand that there's a cost to that. But if you're going to take all of that time and all of that cost just to recruit employees, we still want to be able to know what is going to be the cost when you bring that employee on, because it's never simply just their salary. There are other ancillary costs. So it's a great way to have something in place where you can estimate what that actual cost is going to be. And so then when we talk about retaining those employees, so in companies that have high turnover, you may want to provide them a great benefit, but then you attach things like vesting schedules. And vesting schedules are simply a time that that employee has to stay with you in order for them to take away this benefit. And so if employees are aware of their actual benefits, they'll stay with you a little bit longer, at least in order to get the benefit. And hopefully by that time, whatever reason they had that they might have thought about leaving, they'll actually change their mind. So that's something as well. But then also when you think about things like service requirements, so years of service requirement. So there's not just simply the vesting schedules, but especially as we go into things like the defined benefit plans, it's even more of a reason for someone to stay with you longer. I remember being with an organization and someone said, well, goodness, I could go somewhere and make more, but they have this pension plan here. And so, really, the stability of her having this pension plan in place made her never want to leave the organization that we worked for. So, it definitely can be a sticky situation where you can keep an employee with you much longer if you have the right plan design for your overall plan. And then the last is to retire. And so we talked a little bit about this already. So it gives you liquidity when you're actually ready to sell, when you're ready to walk away, because sometimes the actual process of selling your business might take years. And you might want to partially retire before then. And so I often see business owners who don't have a lot of liquidity. Most of their net worth, most of their value is tied up in their business. And so, what happens if it takes 2 or 3 years in order to sell the business? Well, that means you got to work another 2 or 3 years and continue to generate income because that liquidity is not there. So, as you start to want to step back, that isn't possible because you just simply don't have the liquidity. But then also, one of the bigger things is depending on how you're taking money out of the business, different distributions are counted differently in the valuation of your business. So, what I mean by that is when we look at the valuation of a business, we're looking at salaries. So, as a business owner, are you taking a big, hefty salary? Versus if it's retirement benefits, especially depending on the way that the benefits are written into the plan document, you can actually add that back. So imagine if you're taking out of the company's pocket 50 or $60,000 and putting it in your personal pocket, but then from a valuation perspective, it doesn't damage your valuation because that's not a true expense of the business. And so it provides you a lot of flexibility when we start talking about, what's a great way to pull money out of the business without taking away the valuation of the business, but also making sure that you're not actually getting taxed as well. So a really big deal there. And so when we talk about types of plans, so there's a number of different types of plans, and this is not all encompassing, but there are some pros and cons to different ones. And especially when I talked about knowing your why. So if you're doing a SEP IRA, and so a SEP IRA is super simple. It is something that especially smaller employers are going to be someone that might pick this up. It's inexpensive. There's discretion in the amount that you have to provide and super easy to administer. And what I mean by that is because a lot of the reporting that's typically done in something like a 401k is not required on the SEP IRA side. The problem, and this is a problem for the employee and for the employer, is because you're going to give your employees a certain percentage, so 10% of salary. Well, that's great. As an employee, I like 10% of my salary, especially the fact that I don't have to put anything in. But as an employee, I may be upset if you only put in 2% of my salary, and I could have put in 10% myself. So as an employee, it takes away the ability to put in your own funds. So that could be a con. There is no vesting schedule. So once you give that employee their 10%, if they leave a month later, they take your 10% with them. And so there really is no control, and the plan design aspects are very limited. So you don't have as much opportunity to make changes and to modify the plan to really fit your needs. So yes, it's super simple, super easy, very cheap, but it may or may not fit your needs, because if you have to give 10 of your employees 10% of their salary, they have to put absolutely no money in order to get that 10%. And then if they decide to leave the organization, they also walk away with those funds. That might rub a few business owners the wrong way. And so that's where we move over to the simple IRA. So once again, this is a great inexpensive option. It's super easy to set up. There is low employer contribution requirements. This is only for employers who have less than 100 employees. So as you continue to grow, and there are some employers who grow out of the simple IRA, so they start here, but then they're going to move on. And so then they'll be at a situation where they have to go to a 401k. One of the cons is the required employer contribution. So you don't have as much flexibility. It's definitely way more than on the SEP side. There are lower contribution limits. And so many of us are on the FIRE journey and we're trying to put away as much money as possible. This is going to be much different than on the SEP side, where you can put in up to $58,000. On the simple side, we're talking about $13,500. Very big difference in terms of the contribution amounts. Now, some people may say, goodness, that's all I need. I'm barely putting in the 6,000. Well, that's fine. But you want to plan your exit as you grow. So don't start off and don't put things in place that only give you the expectation that you'll always be at a point where you can only put in $6,000 a year. You want to have an infrastructure in place that you can easily scale and grow. And that's why this is a really good one. It's easy to put in, especially when you're just getting started. You have 5, 10 employees. Maybe you're not putting in over the $13,000 a year. It's a great, easy way to get started. The administrative burden is super simple, super low, but you don't have as much flexibility. So once again, you are going to be required to make an employer contribution, so an employer match, or what we call a non-elective contribution, which basically means everyone gets a certain percent, regardless if they put money in or not. That may work for some employers. Some employers, they may say, goodness, I don't necessarily know if I like that as much either. But on the one hand, it's super inexpensive in order to actually put in place. So that's probably one of the main reasons why employers will put it in place. And when you get to the point where you say, goodness, I think we've outgrown this simple IRA, There are some timelines in terms of when you can transition that over to a 401k plan, but you can actually then transition over to a 401k plan. So that's a really nice option to get started, and then you start to evolve. So if we're talking the 401k, the profit sharing, and even under this umbrella would be something like a 403b, as long as it's an ERISA covered 403b, you're going to have a lot more flexibility. And so you can get very fancy in the overall plan design. You can say, we're not going to allow highly compensated employees, or we're going to make people wait a year before they can put any money in or until they can get any type of match. When we talk about the vesting schedules, you can go out to 5 years. So a lot of business owners like that. So back when we talked about if you're looking to retain employees, and if that's your goal, when we look in those vesting schedules, we might say, goodness, there's a few different ways we can model this, but there are a few different things that we can do to help that employee stay with the organization a little bit longer. This is not going to solve every issue of why employees leave, but that is one of the things that we can actually put within the document. Things like the ability for employees to take hardship withdrawals is one thing that most people really enjoy, or the ability to have loans. So the great thing about the loan option is because, one, there are no qualifiers. You can have horrible credit. That's perfectly fine. And it's typically at 50% of your vested balance, or $50,000, whichever is the lesser. And so it's a great opportunity that if someone needed capital for whatever reason, they always then can have access to their cash as well. So when we talk plan design, you can get really sexy within that 401k profit sharing. And especially from a profit sharing perspective, unfortunately, the word profit sharing sometimes can be a bit misleading, because profit sharing does not mean you actually have any profits. Makes no sense. And so an organization, even a not-for-profit, can do a profit sharing allocation. And the reason why a lot of employers like this is because you can allocate in a number of different ways, whether it be as a percentage of total payroll. So if your total payroll, all of your employees added up together, and they all make a total of $100,000. I know that's not a lot, but let's use simple math. And if you make 50,000 out of that $100,000, you would get 50% of whatever your profit sharing number that you declare. So if you then declare $50,000, then you would get 50% of that. You would get 25%, and whoever gets the next percent would be based on whatever percent of that total $100,000 payroll. A really great option, because as an employer, then you can get a little bit more. If you're an employer and there's a big discrepancy between your age and the rest of your employees, then you can do what's called an age-weighted allocation, where you, of course, then also get a lot more versus the other employees. And you can even do it by classes of employees. So if you want to say the owner class gets the most, and then management gets another percent, and then everyone else gets a different percent, then you can work through that as well. So this allows you to really look at different groups of employees and give favor to them. This allows you to be a lot more complex in terms of who gets what in what scenario. This allows you to protect. So when we talk about the vesting schedules, if what you have matched for an employee is not vested, and that employee decides to leave the organization, unfortunately, that money does not leave with them. And so that's unfortunate for the employee. As the employer, it's great for you because you have retained that money that you've invested in this employee. So just another way for you to get some of that back, unfortunately, because you won't be able to get things back like the training costs, the background checks, and all of those kind of things. But at least this is one investment that you'll be able to bring back into the plan. Now, one con, and this is what people talk about a lot, is the higher cost. Now, most people are paying the cost either through the plan assets, or as a business owner, you might actually write a check for it. And so when we think about the cost of plan administration overall, it's come down substantially over the years. Way more than a lot of other things in terms of pricing, but what you're getting a lot of times is a lot more as well. And so even the access to things like institutional share class mutual funds, which is something that an average retail investor. So if I go and I log on and I try and purchase ABC fund, I'm typically going to purchase an A share, maybe a C share, versus an I share, which is an institutional share class, which is a lot cheaper than those A's and those C shares. So that's always a great plus. That's always a great plus for being within the plan itself. But definitely, it's a higher cost than on the SEP and the simple IRA. But there's a number of great things like tax credits. So if it's a startup plan and you're just getting this started, you have access to significant tax credits that have gone up over the last year. They can offset the cost of the plan administration for the first 3 years. So that's a really great benefit that you'll have. But you also have what's called non discrimination testing. And so non-discrimination testing allows for, and I talked a little bit about, yes, you can give yourself more than some of the other employees. Yes, but only a little bit more. So you can't say all management gets 20% match and everyone else gets 1. Well, that's not going to work. And so there is that comparison. And we talk about a difference between where you are saving and what you're giving versus your non-highly compensated. So in the year 2021, highly compensated employees are considered to be anyone that makes over $130,000. So of course, depending on where you're listening from, that might seem like a lot. Depending on where you are, might not seem like a lot. It might seem like just about everybody is about there. But that's just what they consider to be highly compensated in this particular year. So they're going to look at that group of employees versus the other group of employees. And then what they'll also look at is key employees versus non-key. And so your key employees are simply going to be your employees that are owners or direct relationship to your owners. They also group in a few of the highly compensated depending on how many keys you have. Too much of the weeds, no need to get into that. But that's that non-discrimination testing. And so that's where sometimes they're like, goodness gracious, am I even able to save enough? And it really comes down to your plan design. And I know oftentimes people say, well, goodness, should I put a plan in place? And either they go directly to a financial advisor or they go directly to their CPA, which are people that should be a part of the conversation, but maybe not as versed in the day-to-day in terms of plan design. And oftentimes that's how the plans get set up and they're not in the greatest setups. So when we talk about plan design, typically we're putting together a whole team that can evaluate what is the impact of this design decision on your personal tax situation, but your tax person might not know all the different design options that are existing and out there. Your investment person might not. And oftentimes when I talk about plans, typically think people are 100% thinking about just investments, but that is a small portion of the actual retirement plan. That plan design and that ability to save a certain amount and the ability to structure what those savings looks like, and that changes what your taxable income from them looks like as well. All of that is huge. And that's part of the plan design conversation, not necessarily investment conversation, because regardless if the investments are performing one way or another, the ability to max out those savings is substantial. I did some rough math. And so oftentimes people are like, well, I'll just get an IRA. So of course, the max you can put in an IRA in 2021 is $6,000. So if you are on the FI track and you started saving, let's say in your 20s, and you're going to retire in your 40s. So that's 20 years. And I split this 6,000 into equal 12 months in payments. After 20 years at just 6%, so not even an aggressive amount, you would have $230,000. That's nice. Nothing wrong with that. But if you were in the SEP and you were able to max out that 58,000, that's $2.2 million. I'm going to say that again. So for people who are like, maybe not. The ability to save more over that time period was a $2 million difference. I don't care what your return is. It really doesn't matter. The ability to save more makes such a substantial difference. And that's not even taken into account that there was a tax benefit built into that. And you're able to put this money away without even worrying about where your taxes are. So of course, there's a phase out if you are putting money into an IRA and you make over $66,000. Then of course there's a phase out and even the deductibility of that. But as a business owner, this is a business expense. Could be a business expense. I'm not giving tax advice. Um, and then on the simple IRA side, you're able to put in 13.5. So if you put that 13.5 in every year for those 20 years, once again, we're at $520,000. That is almost twice as much as that IRA number again. And so once again, on the 401k side, if you just put in the 19.5, this is nothing on the profit sharing, nothing on the company match, you're at $750,000, 3 times as much as an IRA. And so when people talk about expenses, the expenses are it's scientifically, and I have a nice little study I can share with you later, that's the least impactful on your ability to actually retire. The biggest is going to be time. So your time in the actual market. And then, of course, your ability to make good decisions and have some decent asset allocation. But the actual expenses of your portfolio are going to be substantially different. And so when we look within the actual options that you have, you want to be able to get there quicker. And you want to look at avenues in order to get you there quicker. One great thing, and I know Roth IRAs are very popular out there, the Roth 401k option. So as you continue to make more, so many people are going to be priced out or income out of the ability to put money directly into a Roth. Yes, you can do the backdoor Roth option, but the Roth 401k option has no income limits. And what that means is you make $200,000, you can put in your 19.5 directly into the Roth 401k plan. No one cares what you make. Big difference. So there are definitely some benefits that exist within there. Any questions so far? All right, we'll keep it rolling. One of the other things, and people often talk about on the defined benefit side, and this is one of the plans that have mostly kind of gone to the wayside. We're seeing a lot more popularity on the cash balance side than we're actually seeing on the defined benefit side. But I'll tell you a little bit about both. Cash balance plans look a lot more like a 401k inbreed or hybrid of defined benefit plans. They're going to be a lot easier to administer than a traditional pension plan. And this is what we're seeing a lot less of. People are saying, oh, well, they frozen my account and so forth. And it's higher benefits. And so the difference is on the prior plans, we're talking about we're going to give you X amount of dollars. So you look at your employee and you say, I'm okay giving you a 1% match. And that means next year, you know how much they make and you know what 1% is, you know exactly how much you're going to give them. But the big thing is if you're making a significant amount of money. So I'll tell you about a client that I had, and they had a situation where they came into a great business opportunity. Over $1 million is something that they were going to get over a series of years. And so they really needed to get this money from a taxable situation to a non-taxable situation. So we've talked about the limits. So on the SEP IRA, on the 401k, on the simple, if you got an extra $1 million, that's really not going to kind of put you where you need to be. But on the defined benefit side, we can actually, so you're basing all of your contributions based on providing a certain benefit at a predetermined time. And so in this scenario, the maximum income that they take into account is a little over $200,000 a year. So everything that you're putting in today is so you can give at max someone $200,000 a year. If they only make 50, we're not giving them $200,000 a year. But you can create a number of different formulas and so forth. But if you look and it's you, your spouse, maybe your children work in the business as well. And let's say you're able to put in $150,000 for you, $150,000 for your spouse, maybe $20,000 for your children. You just moved $320,000 out of the actual business checking account into your personal savings, because this is allocated for your retirement, and it changes your taxable situation. So that can be very beneficial, especially if you come into large sums of money, or if you've picked up a large contract, or as your business continues to grow, or if the majority of your employees are kind of close. So those are all family members, something like that. You're going to want to look into these because these are great opportunities for you to put away a lot of money, have that great tax deduction. You can include less employees. So on the 401k side, it's basically going to be some basics in terms of how long have they worked with you? Are they full-time, part-time, some basics like that, and then they're in. But you can definitely be a lot more discriminatory on the defined benefit side and limit the number of people that you're going to provide that benefit for. It's definitely more expensive. But more expensive is relative depending on what you're getting in return. But then there are some mandatory funding requirements. And what I mean by that when I say mandatory funding requirements is every single year, we're going to look at this pool of money and say, is this pool of money large enough to provide me a certain amount, provide somebody else and all the other employees, whatever defined benefit that you have said you'll provide. And if not, as an employer, you need to make up the difference. And so that's why a lot of employers have said, oh, I just got to get out of this. It's a lot easier for them to say, we know how much all of our employees make, and we're going to match them at 3%, 4%, what have you. And they can estimate that year over year pretty accurately. It's very hard for them to estimate where the market will go. And if we have another 2008, they may be stuck in a situation where business isn't that great, but they also have to make up this shortfall in the defined benefit plan. If it's a small group, it might be a tad bit easier, but it can definitely be an issue. So this is one of those, we want to see some substantial earnings over time, or at least that you're going to estimate it, because we at least want that plan to be in place for about 5 years on the lower side of things. But this is something that we'll often put in place for business owners if they have kind of that light at the end of the tunnel and they're preparing to retire maybe 5 years down the road and they don't have a lot saved. So now we need to ramp this up pretty quickly and throw in as much money as we possibly can so we can move that money outside of the business without creating a substantial taxable event for that client. And then the last plan we'll talk about is non-qualified plans. So there's a difference between plans that are covered under ERISA and plans that are not. And so when we talk non-qualified plans, these are not for most people. This is going to be your business have reached a nice standard. You are making a decent amount of money. But one thing is, you now have a significant pool of highly compensated employees. And so like we said a little bit earlier, highly compensated employees are anyone who makes over $130,000. So you want a decent little group of people who make over the $130,000. And you also want them to be maxing out that 19.5 today. So a lot of large corporations have this, but also some closely held businesses will have it as well if they're at a point. So like work for a company and recently did this for another organization. They have probably about 50 employees, but about 40 of them are highly compensated. You can discriminate a lot more in these type of plans in terms of leaving more employees out. But when we talk additional limits, so they can put in that 19.5, they could put another 200,000 on the non-qual side. And so this is not for everyone. If you're just getting to the point where you're putting in the 6,000 in your IRA, you may not be there yet. But on the non-qualified side, it really allows you to make up that difference if you either haven't saved as much or want to be able to put in a significant amount more. So if you're a high earner or you're having some high earning years in the future and you know that's coming, this is a great way to start moving more of that money over to the non-qual plan. This is another level of complexity. It's definitely significantly higher in terms of complexity. From a cost perspective, it's really going to depend on a few different things. If it's a standalone non-qualified plan or if it's an integrated non-qualified plan. And what I mean by integrated is if it's integrated with your 401k plan, because typically people don't have a non-qual plan just by itself. They have that in addition to a 401k plan. And if that's the case with that integration, a lot of times you might get some better pricing as well. Any questions thus far? All right. And so that is the end. And so really and truly just want to make sure that you have a good understanding that as you're planning your business, you understand employee benefits. Unfortunately, many of our small businesses aren't able to get to that next level. And part of it is not able to have the talent that you want, but also making sure that you're not looking from a financial perspective and you're making the steps to put those things in place where you can have the best tax impact, but also so you can take out money from the business that isn't purely just distributions. And so we don't want to devalue the business so much that you're taking away the ability for your business to actually have the maximum value when you're ready to retire. So I want to thank you all. Let me check and make sure. Oh, we do have a couple of questions. One, it says, can you start a 401k without other employees? And so it says, do you have to be a setup as an employee to have a simple IRA? So a couple of different things. So one, you can have a
Hold
solo.
on, before you answer that question, could you go back to your slide on the simple IRA, the SEP, and
Yes.
I think it helps if you answer the question while we look at that.
Yes. So if you wanted a solo 401k, that's where you're the only employee. That's an option. And the great thing about the 401k, even the funding options too, is you can have a number of different things in your 401k plan. You can have art, raw land, hotels, real estate, all of those great things. They will make it harder for you to find servicers, but it's an option. And what was that other question? I missed that one. Let me go back. Can you read that other question for me, Jessica?
Do you have to be set up as an employee if you have a simple IRA plan?
So as a simple IRA plan, you are going to need to be an employee. So you're going to have some type of distribution, and it could be K1 income as well. But you're going to need to be, you can't just be a solopreneur. And so you need to have some formal type of distribution, because of course that's going to be based on what your true income is and how they can deduct that, because this is going to directly reduce your taxable income as well. So you'll need to at least make 13.5, so you can take the 13.5 off and you can make zero in that particular year. So there's a number of different things there, but you definitely want to be at a situation where you can get money. And unfortunately, I had this happen. This was on the 401k side, and they weren't aware that because of the way they set up the plan and they excluded all these different classes of employees and so forth, they were the only people, and the owners were the only people who couldn't get into the plan. So when I talk plan design, talk through what you're trying to do. If the purpose of your plan is to recruit and retain, you may not care that you can't get in the plan. But if the purpose of your plan is to retire, you want to make sure your design allows you to actually be in the plan. You want to make sure that your design is going to allow you to maximize your personal benefits as well. So it goes back to your why. Understanding your why will then allow you to point to the next direction in terms of what else can you do.
And another good thing about these plans, if I'm not mistaken, is that you can have all four of these or all three of these plans and not have a huge amount of income, but these are good plans you can have as you're starting out, but as you see the trajectory of your business growing.
Exactly. Another thing I will add that some people may not be familiar with or aware of is you can use these as great protections. And so when we talk about the ability to protect your assets, so most people might not know, but some IRAs, so Roth IRAs are not in every state statute in terms of bankruptcy. We don't ever want to get there, but sometimes as a business owner, you might just have to call it a day and walk away. And so some Roth IRAs don't get the same coverage depending on the state that you're in. Traditional IRAs typically get a limit of a little over $1 million, like $1 million to $1.3 million. 401ks have unlimited protection. And what I mean by that is if you file for bankruptcy, if you were sued, somebody could take every asset that you have, and you could have $4 million sitting in your profit sharing and 401k plan, and they couldn't do anything about it. That's beautiful. I had an employer, and that was the reason why she was setting it up, because she was saving all this money on the side, and she ended up having to restructure her business through bankruptcy. And someone said, well, at least you get to keep the money in your 401k plan. And she said, what? I don't have it. So it was really nice to be able to at least protect your assets. And so it's a huge difference. And I think when we first get started in terms of savings, these numbers are so big and you're like, "Ah, never me." But your business could easily get there, and your business can get there in a shorter amount of time, especially as you're acting strategically. You understand where you're going. And then, unfortunately, if you have put in place the wrong structures that you can't take advantage of these benefits, you're going to be in a worse off situation than if you had. So, definitely planning as you go and looking bigger, because you can definitely get there. Not all businesses that are billion-dollar businesses today started off with the mindset that they would be $1 billion, but they quickly had to put the infrastructure in place in order to get there.
Excellent.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
You talked about setting up a team. You talked about having a CPA on your team. You talked about also having a person that manages your investments. Now, the other person who will be setting up this plan is the administrative person,
Yes.
the plan administrator.
So a number of different people. So when we talk about the team, your CPA is going to tell you your impact of whatever it is that you're looking to put in place. So if you say, I want to put a plan in place to recruit employees, you're probably not going to have as big of a tax impact because that's not the plan design that you're looking for. But if you're looking to put a plan in place to reduce your taxable situation and you're like, okay, Rosalind, tell me how I can put away the maximum amount as possible. And then I'm going to give you a number based on the plan design options that you have. You take that to your CPA and they're going to tell you, all right, if you do what she said, your tax situation is going to change from X to Y. And so that's why we're a part of the same team. And so typically on my side, they'll call me a record keeper. So the record keeper are the actual people who are keepers of the record, not that fancy of a term, but we're institutional advisors or retirement advisors. We've been called a number of different things, but typically we're going to be like a record keeper. And then you'll have someone who's actually doing the investments. And so, mind you, I've never talked about the investments here because in reality, if you're in the wrong type of plan, even if your investments are performing very well, you're still not going to be able to put away as much, save as much, and make as big of an impact. And especially if your goal is to do something different. So, if your goal is to do something in terms of recruiting and retaining, or maybe you're going to do some mergers and acquisitions and you're going to merge with another organization, then your investment person conversation, that's going to happen later. It's a key piece, but that's going to happen after we talk about plan design. So, if you're going to merge with an organization, one thing we always look at is both plans, because you're going to move people into one organization under one umbrella of benefits. And if you don't align those benefits, somebody's going to be very upset. There's going to be a group that might be happy, a group that might be content. But if one organization has very strong benefits and another weaker benefits, the weaker people are like, oh, this is what we've always had. But those people who had a strong benefit overall, or a benefit rich package, they may start looking for other employment. And so, really, we want to know those things and take that into account, especially as you're anticipating and looking at and trying to anticipate what your future fees are going to be as well. Any other questions?
I just want to circle back in case we were about to draw us to a conclusion, is that this is looking at the different types of retirement plans is an awesome tool for recruiting. And since we've been talking about not being reactive, but being more proactive and having a team, these are all things to keep in mind. Again, we just want to reiterate that this could be a recruiting tool. So I think a lot of times we as Black women or newer entrepreneurs, you might not have the reason why you're bringing on employees is to scale your business. And sometimes we might think that we don't have enough money to do these things, but Rosalind has presented some very nice options for you to use your retirement plans as a recruiting tool so that later on you can continue to build the income, but you can get the people on board who will help you build that income and think more strategically.
I think that's exactly true. If you're recruiting employees and you say, we don't have any benefits at all, and sometimes what will happen is employers will say, goodness, can I have health insurance or retirement? Probably can't afford to do both. Oftentimes, your retirement plan is going to be a lot less expensive than insurance. So if you're bringing on employees and they're like, what kind of benefits do we have? Well, put the simple in place and have something to get started. Or you can look into the 401k plans. There is new legislation that has brought plan pricing down even more. And so when we talk about things like pooled employer plans, the modification of some of the multiple employer plans, there's a number of different ways that your overall administrative costs can be a lot lower. And I think sometimes people are like, nope, I know it's going to be expensive. I don't even want to have the conversation. But definitely to have the conversation, know where you are, taking into account the tax credit. I didn't say deduction, tax credit. So that is a 1-for-1 benefit. It could bring the cost down substantially to a point where your cost might be very minimal. We're talking maybe $1,000 less a year. And that gives you a great benefit for the first 3 years. So not just once, but the first 3 years. And after that, of course, your staff is growing, your business is growing, and you're going to be in a much better situation overall. But at least you're taking advantage of all those benefits that exist on day one. So it's very key just to put yourself in a situation where you have that flexibility, where you can do some different things, but also make sure that you're in a point where you can be competitive. Because the last thing you want is to lose out on a great employee simply because they're like, you don't have anything, no benefit at all. You might say, well, we could put something in place. And yeah, you can. But some of these plans are going to take a little bit longer than others. I mean, on the 401k side, for a startup, we're talking probably about 30, 45 days. So if you're looking to hire someone and you're hoping they're going to join your team in the first week or two, and you need some time to talk it through, figure out the provider, all these kind of things, you may be pushed out longer and you may prevent that employee from even wanting to come on because you just don't have the infrastructure in place. All right. Any other questions? I don't see anything else. So if there is nothing else, I want to thank you all for joining us once again. And until next week, don't forget next week, our speaker will be talking about getting your first investment property. I know a lot of people are looking to expand on the amount of additional income or passive income that they're taking on. So make sure you join us next week for another Money Monday. And I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a great night.